1 week season.
Hello, it is week 4 of the DFS season. I'm coming to you here, OWS family. This is Mr. Prich with week 4's bias check. Now, I am a teacher, so last week I had many mispronunciations, and I pride myself on knowing names. I think I have to learn about 150 new names every year. We have about 600 students in my school, and I work with all of them, so it's good for me to try to know everyone's name and to know pronunciations. So last week, I think I said Stefan Barkley, Ashton Gianti, and a few others. It reminded me of a funny story that I wanted to start with, and this does relate to bias. So after college, I did a volunteer program. I signed up with a volunteer program, and they sent me to Tanzania, which is a country in East Africa. Ended up being there for about 3.5 years, and my first day teaching in a class of, I guess, 13 or 14-year-old students. I did not know Swahili when I first moved there. Many of the students who went to the school did not know English yet. And I was sort of sent into a classroom with about 40 of these students. And so I took attendance. And the names were, different names. I was not used to pronouncing African names. And I still remember one young lady who I pronounced her name. It's looking back, it's a simple name now. But I looked at my sheet and I said, all right, Khadija. She says, no. And she says it for me. I say, okay, well, it sounded like that. Khadija. So it goes on like this, goes on and on. Finally, I realized there's some sort of nuance to the beginning sound. It's kind of like a swallow, like Khadija. Finally, I got something close to it. It had been, it had to be, I think I counted at some point, it was 16 reminders. No, it's this way. No, it's this way. So I kept at it. So I will keep at it for you guys. I'll try to correct some of those miscues. I was sick last week, so hopefully it goes a little better this week. But even so, right, I can imagine people are saying, this guy doesn't know names. He can't pronounce things. He doesn't know anything. We can't trust him, right? That's a bias. You got to check that bias. But I will try to be better at those names. Also going into this week, I carry with me a bad beat. On Monday night, I was high on Montgomery as the captain. I had a few lineups, and one, going into the last plays of the game, as is always a story with bad beats, was, tied atop a tournament for 25K with two other leaders. So each of us was getting 25K, splitting 75K. So each of us was going to get 25K. And I got beat by the late touchdown to Mark Andrews. Had Mark Andrews on my team, but not in the captain spot. So still got a nice payday, but man, when you carry those around, right, those close calls, they do affect you. They are a bias in themselves and can affect the way that you play from here on out. So it's important to recognize your play as a DFS player, if you're getting close, and how that affects your play. I wrote an article, a course, which for all Inner Circle members is free. And I would encourage reading that if you have had experiences like that, and what to do and how to get over some of those. All right, so let's get on with this. We're going to look back at some of the bias from week 3 and see if we can learn anything moving forward. I had gone game by game last week and identified some of the bias I was noticing in each game. For example, Pittsburgh, they had a couple difficult outings on defense. But we always knew the Pittsburgh defense has been good. It's kind of a staple of their team and their coaching staff. And so we said, let's not dismiss sort of this large sample of Pittsburgh's success on defense. Sort of the base rate, what we expect. Let's not dismiss that for 2 games that were bad. And there was a narrative around it too, right? Injuries, players had gotten old. So that narrative also kind of played into that bias. But last week, Pittsburgh's defense forced 4 fumbles. They had 1 interception. They had 5 sacks against, a decent New England team. So again, I think we can, which sadly underwhelmed for a defense last week. Gosh, what a week to be on the Pittsburgh defense. But I think we can continue to target them in DFS because they are aggressive and they do lead to good DFS scores. We talked about the primacy bias for Green Bay. People were appointing them the Super Bowl champions, the World Series, Super Bowl champions. And they crashed back down to earth after a loss to Cleveland. Well, there's some things we probably lost in that bias. Of sort of elevating Washington up to a status. We missed that the Cleveland run defense, right, may be elite on the year. It was the first road game for Green Bay, and their offense obviously struggled a little bit on the road. So again, that was a bias that we were able to recognize and not get too caught up in rostering Green Bay players. For Houston and Jacksonville, we said, don't let the limiting QBs keep you from a big score, right? Trevor Lawrence has just really limited his team. It's possible that Houston has been limited by their quarterback as well. And so we said, someone's going to score here. We have 2 first-round two talents who have been drafted in the first round. They haven't gone off yet this year, really. Someone's going to score here. And it was Nico Collins, right? Did have a good game. He was worth it if you had rostered him. He definitely was a player that you could have used on your way to a tourney win. So again, just something we were able to identify there. There were a lot of new quarterbacks last week, backup quarterbacks. And the one that I sort of talked a little bit about was Jake Browning, recognizing that just because the starter was out, just because Burrow was out, that there's certain biases that go with it, like this idea of loss aversion. Well, I don't want to jump in on Jamar Chase, and I'll be so upset if I'm wrong. That's a bias that people have versus, well, the joy if you get it right. There's a difference there. So we did get it wrong. I got it wrong. I played a little bit of Jamar Chase. He did not do good. But again, that was a bias that we can recognize, and it really did not work out there. Everyone recognizes that was just such a lopsided game. Philadelphia, we said, they had 253 passing yards. Are they ever going to pass again? Well, yeah, that was a bias. We recognized that a team needed to force them to throw. Could any team do that? Turns out, yes, it was the Rams. And they did. And Philly can throw. And they're pretty good when they throw, at least against the Rams. So I think that's one we can take forward. Philadelphia is going to have a matchup this week where we might need to, again, examine. Can they throw? Will they throw? And what do we get if they do take to the air? Indianapolis, we said, are they for real? Well, yes, they are for real. At this point, I think we can trust that there is something there, and we'll get into it a little bit in the next section. We talked a lot about Ashton Genty and that, his slow start. There was a narrative about the poor play of the offensive line. And again, he did not do well. There's going to be even more confirmation bias for people who have been fading Genty. And again, he was only 4% owned, I think, last week. I played 20% of him. Of course, those lineups, it didn't work out. But I'm going to continue playing Ashton Genty. The O line may still be struggling. Again, those are things that over time with new players they can develop offensive lines, change their play so that they're doing a little better. They've also played two really tough run Ds in New England and Washington, who at least at the moment are really rating out well. And there are some reasons, some personnel moves that kind of identify those changes, or at least, sort of solidify the idea that those changes may be for real. So it's possible that he's also just run into a couple really tough run Ds. So I'm going to keep playing Ashton Genty. We talked a little bit about Chicago. Again, Chicago is going to be in another sort of appetizing matchup this week against Las Vegas in a dome. Well, it turns out, we had talked about the narrative on Caleb Williams, and again, he was a problem for the team, and that, maybe Ben Johnson couldn't turn this team around because of Caleb Williams. And that was definitely a confirmation bias after watching the Detroit dismantle Chicago, and Chicago not really be able to come back there. I think after last week and watching Williams, I think we can understand that, he's not bad and he's not great. Turns out he's still developing. He does have good coaching. Why do we know that? Well, the Bears were very familiar with the Detroit defensive coordinator, and I think good coaching takes advantage of that, and they were able to take advantage of that. So I do think Ben Johnson is a good coach, and that he will continue to advance Caleb Williams' play and to develop some of those connections he has, and that we can still roster him in DFS, especially when the situation is going to call for them passing a lot, or against defenses where a good coaching will kind of stand out. So again, we need to kind of play that on a case-by-case basis. We talked about the split between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet before Charbonnet was announced out. I think I recorded it when he had a foot problem or an ankle problem. And we said, well, if he is announced out, everyone's going to play him. Yeah, Kenneth Walker was 45% owned in a 3-entry max I was in. He was the highest owned running back, and he didn't disappoint. He didn't do horrible. Obviously, if the game was closer, it would have been a different story. That one's kind of a wash. The bias, I think we understood that he would be high owned, and it would have been a good play if Charbonnet had played with a little injury tag. I think Kenneth Walker would have been a little bit less owned then. I think 45% was just too much in that spot. After I took a look at Kenneth Walker and his ownership, I ran down the top owned running backs, and running back ownership was pretty sharp last week. There were a few lower owned guys, Omarion Hampton, maybe a couple others. But in general, the highest owned running backs performed the best. You just had to have the right combination. That's why it's good to mix and match a core group of running backs on your rosters. You'll often make a good decision if you do that. All right, so that's a rundown from last week. At the end, we'll look ahead towards next week and again pinpoint some of the places where bias is leading us to play differently, play maybe sharper. So I'll get to those at the end. Part of recognizing bias, though, is also trying to uncover truths that we can rely on. What data is out there, or what is happening that has a narrative attached and data attached, that we can sort of combine the logic and say, yeah, it's looking like this is something that can continue as long as the pieces remain in place. So I've long understood that offensive statistics from year to year are stickier than defensive statistics, that there is a better correlation between a team performing well, an offense performing well in 2024 and continuing into 2025, right? There have been studies done that show that correlation based on the DVOA data, based on a couple other sites and the data they use to rate offenses. And that really comes down to this idea that offense is kind of a more, or people posit that offense is more of a repeatable skill, that the skills that drive an offense are repeatable: quarterback play, offensive line quality, coaching and scheme, that those are all things that if they were good in one season will be good to the next. And that defense is, a little bit less correlative for a number of reasons. So in 2024, the top offenses by DVOA, and this again should correlate in some way to this year, barring big changes, were Baltimore, Buffalo, Detroit. And I just want to stop there and notice that let's take those three off the table. Those three offenses are 2, 3, and 4 in the 2025 DVOA rankings. So Baltimore, Buffalo, and Detroit were good last year. They have a lot of the same personnel, and they are good this year. Okay. Let's look to the next team, two teams, Green Bay and Cincinnati. Green Bay and Cincinnati are not among the top offenses by DVOA in 2025 so far. So we'll check back on that. Washington, San Francisco, and the Rams are all top 10 offenses from 2024. Washington, San Francisco, and the Rams are all top 10 offenses from 2025. And falling out of the top 10 between 24 and 25 are Tampa Bay and Kansas City. So we know in the game, the great game of DFS, to trust in top offenses to produce. That is quite an obvious statement. So it's good to know who the top offenses are. And knowing that can help you to, again, recognize bias. For an example, Washington is a good offense because it has a good quarterback, a good offensive line play, a good scheme by a coach. So when you lose the quarterback and you sub in a capable quarterback like Marcus Mariota, the offense can keep humming. That's kind of generally what this data is saying. Cincinnati lost their quarterback. They put in a new quarterback, Jake Browning. But Cincinnati has not been a top offense in 2025. So it's possible there's been a decline in their scheme. A lot of people have talked about how their scheme is pretty vanilla. And it's possible that that's catching up to them. And Cincinnati, the offensive line is not great in Cincinnati. So it's understandable where Cincinnati would drop off as a top offense. And it may not be simply because of Jake Browning. It may be the offense in general. So that's something I'm gonna look for. I didn't think about that last week when I played Jamar Chase a little bit. I kind of trusted the 39.5 DraftKings points he put up the week before with Jake Browning. But there's a little bit more doubt in my mind with Cincinnati's offense right now. I said, let's look at Green Bay, Cincinnati, Tampa Bay, and Kansas City. Okay, Green Bay we've gone through. Cincinnati we went through. Green Bay, well, they're right now 20th in run DVOA. Again, it's only been 3 weeks. They're 7th, though, in pass. So their offense is doing something, but it looks like something may have happened to the offensive line or the scheme, or just that they haven't been committing as much to the run. But it's definitely something to watch for. They may be falling off a little bit this year as an offense. We will see, to be determined. Tampa Bay, it makes a lot of sense. They're down 3 offensive line starters. They lost Liam Cohen, even though their scheme is supposed to remain the same. So it makes sense that their offense has fallen off. And that's important to consider. They have a pretty condensed offense going forward, but it might not be as good as it was in 2024, when really they dominated a lot of DFS slates. So I of course am interested in Tampa Bay this week, but I will not just sort of blindly put them in expecting 2024 results. All right, Kansas City, if you look at them, well, gosh, from my perspective, this is hard to say, but right, are they aging a little bit? Is their offensive line play and their QB play a little bit on the decline? Again, I don't have the data to back this up. It's a narrative that is out there that, as you watch, also kind of stands out just a little bit. And the fact that they're losing skill position players, which really keeps them from running their scheme. They are not able to kind of beat people over the top with as many of the players that they wanted to. So is that keeping them from running their scheme? So Kansas City may be down this year. There's a few offenses that are newly into this top 10 this year. And how do we trust what they are doing? Well, Indianapolis. We know that Indianapolis has a good offensive line, one of the best in the league, and that they have a good signal caller, a great offensive mind in Shane Steichen. These are two of those repeatable skills, and what they were missing was a dependable quarterback, and Daniel Jones seems to have filled that. So I do think we can trust Indianapolis going forward, even though we haven't seen this before. Seattle has a new quarterback. They have a better offensive line. They have a new offensive coach. Those are a lot of moving parts, but those are kind of three of the more important things, skills that an offense relies on. I can't fully accept this as a top 10 offense, just because the outcome is a little bit in conflict with some of the norms and the rules, like they were not in the top 10 in 2024. And there's so many moving parts. So it's hard to kind of quantify whether their success is going to last, or whether they're more of an average or above average offense rather than elite. Time will tell. So again, this identifies, right, a few teams that we can trust more often than not. Again, I'll repeat those: Buffalo, Detroit, Baltimore, the Rams, San Francisco, Washington. These offenses are going to succeed more than they fail. They're going to push game environments. They are teams that are going to score a lot of points this season if their parts remain intact. Another thing I want to look at is condensed offenses. I promise this part will be pretty quick, but there's a little bit of data here. As I went through and looked at the offenses, players that are getting a large percentage of target share, I wanted to identify offenses where only 2 or 3 players were eating up a large percent, 60-70% of the target share, where a single running back as a part of that already condensed wide receiver and tight end pool would grab more of the target share and snap count, right, thereby even reducing the volume being spread out more. So as I went through this, identified some teams, and again, these are teams that we want to trust in DFS, that they are showing us that they rely on a small group of people, and that, and we, of course, we have to determine if we trust what they're doing is going to maintain, but that we can trust who they are going to give the ball to, right? Again, which is valuable in DFS, which already helps us to eliminate bias when we know something. So the Rams are, as they've done the last few years, have 2 top receivers, Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, who are I think, eating up 68% of the target share. And then Kyron Williams, who's taking 75% of the snap share. So those three are the offense, right, for the Rams week in and week out. We can trust that if we play Rams, if we stack Rams or roster any Rams, that it should be one of those players who's going to generate those separator scores. Okay, the rest of it I'll go quick because the explanation is done here. New Orleans, right? 72% of their targets are going to three players: Olave, Johnson, and Shaheed. And Kamara is getting a lot of the snap, 79% of the snaps. Good offense to target. Tampa Bay, this offense is condensing even more. Of course, Godwin will be back. I think Godwin will take over maybe Evans' share. So originally it was Evans 28%, Ibuka 22%, Shepard 15%, Irving 14% of the target share, and 73% of the snap share. Again, a condensed offense between those four players. Godwin will step in and take over, for one of those. Miami, right? Tyreek, Achane, Waddle, a three-headed monster where if we want to invest in them on any week, we know exactly who to roster. Philadelphia, right? A.J. Brown is 26% of the target share. Smith, 25% of the target share. Saquon, 16% of the target share. And Barkley also getting 85% of the snaps. Extremely condensed and high-scoring offense. The Chargers, they have Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnson, Ladd McConkey, and then Hampton is taking up 74% of the snap share. Another highly condensed offense. Las Vegas, Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, Trey Tucker, and then Ashton Genty. Only 66% of the snaps, so he is a little low there. Atlanta is a little bit on the lower end. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson, but the fact that Bijan Robinson is a running back is getting 17% of the target share and 76% snaps. That's usable, right? They have a wide receiver, a tight end, and a running back that would be a great stack with the quarterback in a game where they're expected to throw a lot. Stay tuned. Seattle, right, has JSN and Cooper Kupp. Again, those are only two players. I'm not as excited in that, but they are an offense to watch. So again, those are offenses I want to roster in DFS. Those are offenses I want to target in the right game environments and right matchups because I know who to roster. All right, looking ahead to this week and some bias that is in the news. Call this section our bias check. Looking ahead to the New England game. The New England running back situation right now, and this is a juicy matchup for running backs against Carolina. There's a huge bias out there against Stevenson because he fumbled twice, and Antonio Gibson, who was brought in as well, fumbled, and Henderson was the only running back who did not fumble. And so there's a large sort of bias towards Henderson being the starting running back going forward. A lot of people hoping for that to happen in this juicy matchup. It's really anyone's guess right now, right? Until we see it on the field. So that is a bias that we can recognize. It's, something that makes a lot of sense in our eyes. But let's look sort of deeper into that because what happens if he does get that lead role? Let's sort of take away the guessing and say, well, what do we get if he gets that lead role? It'll still probably only be 65% of the snaps, which is what Stevenson was getting. And the other two running backs will come in and spell him at times. But he's only 5.2K. He's probably one of the lowest rosterable running backs on the week. He's facing a weaker defense. a below average run defense. And even with a 65% snap share, right? He gets 11 to 14 carries, 4 to 6 targets, and there is the big play upside that he brings to the game. I think he would still be worth it if he got that. So if there is any indication that he will be the lead back moving forward, that's a situation to jump on as long as the ownership it remains in check. And hopefully there's a question mark that stays with this situation up until the game is played. And that would be really a great time to sort of dive into this, as long as the ownership is low. More importantly, I think in this game, if you do play Henderson, well, then you expect that you are rostering Henderson, and it is a winning roster, so he's succeeding, he's doing well. New England is showing a lot of signs of being a pass funnel team. So if Henderson is doing well, Carolina is almost definitely passing against this pass funnel defense in an attempt to keep up with them. And then Tet McMillan becomes a great play for the 10 plus targets that he's likely going to get with his big play ability. So if you are playing Henderson, I would strongly suggest playing Tet opposite him. All right, moving on to another situation, which is important for us this week. Michael Penix, his bad play was called out publicly by a group of analysts on ESPN. That's a strong negative bias, something that is out there against a player. I don't think a lot of people are looking to roster him this week, but it'll probably shut off a lot of eyes towards the Atlanta offense as well. And even if you don't want to play Penix, the Atlanta offense this week, they have had an extremely low PROE. They have been extremely run heavy. But the offense is going to be much better suited to the pass this week because they're playing Washington. Washington is a team that should have success on offense, right? They're one of those top offensive teams. And if Atlanta does fall behind, they should be passing. Washington has also shown a great ability to stop the run. So again, they should sort of tilt towards the pass. Bijan Robinson is a great pass catcher. So there's a lot of reasons to play some of the supporting pieces. Bijan Robinson may see his targets increase, even if he's not able to create a lot of lanes in the running game. But that's great for fantasy, right? Penix, even if he's passing and maybe he's not great, right? Well, he turns the ball over, Washington scores, and then he's back with it again. And even more targets to his guys. Drake London may see a high target game. Kyle Pitts may see a high target game. So this situation could still be good for fantasy purposes, even if Michael Penix is not a good player. All right, moving on. Cleveland's run D. It might be for real. Again, this is a little bit of a bias. They had a average to below average defense last year. And again, this is a small sample size. We'd be falling into a recency bias if we simply said, I can't play the Detroit running game this week, even though it went off last week against Baltimore. Cleveland's run D is for real now, right? I can't play rushes against them. Again, we can't fully know that yet. Defense is not as sticky. The correlation between defensive performances game to game is not as sticky. So if Cleveland does have a bad game in their run defense here, right? Well, someone like Gibbs might be a great play. But imagine that Cleveland's defense is for real. Their run defense is for real. Someone like Gibbs still might be a great play, right, in the Detroit passing game. And the Detroit passing game may be more in play. And they have great wide receivers with great fantasy-friendly skills. So if Cleveland's run D is for real, again, you can recognize this as a bias. Yeah, it's for real. Well, if it is, there may be a way to capitalize. And if it isn't, that way to capitalize might still be the same way. So Jahmyr Gibbs is in play based on this bias this week. Christian Kirk came back last week. How do you frame his debut? Team was kind of off. He caught 3 passes for about 20 yards. Didn't really do much. Okay, let's wait and see how he does this week before I play him. Right, there's a bias in that. Again, sort of multiple biases that cause your mind to sort of dismiss a line like 3 for 20 yards in someone's first game. Well, let's look a little deeper, closer at Christian Kirk. The team needs him. Houston really needs to sort of get that offense going. And in his debut, another way to frame it is that he had 8 targets and played 67% of the snaps, coming back from a hamstring injury. Christian Kirk is 4.4K. He had 8 targets playing behind CJ Stroud. I think he is definitely in play next week, especially as salaries get a little bit tighter moving into the season. He's someone who probably will not be 4.4K. His price will probably go up to the 5Ks as a wide receiver too on that offense. So I imagine the way that we frame his debut says a lot about what we think about him. But those 8 targets are interesting to me, and I want to see more of that. Finally, looking forward to this week. Philadelphia opened up their passing game last week and produced 3 extremely beneficial scores in the quarterback and the 2 wide receivers. Will Philly open it up and pass again here? Again, bias kind of leads us in both directions. The base rate bias is that Philadelphia does not pass the ball, that they're very conservative, right? They keep it on the ground. And then recency bias says, well, they opened it up last week and they needed to. And they saw the success and they're going to pass again, right? Because they've been so successful. Again, let's take it on a case-by-case basis. This week, they're playing a Tampa Bay defense that their norm is to shut down running backs. They've continued to do it into this season. Philadelphia does not really want to open themselves up to all the exotic blitzes of Tampa Bay, right? Tampa Bay has given Jalen Hurts fits in 2, I think, playoff games. They were eliminated in the playoffs by Tampa Bay, and that included a ton of sacks of Jalen Hurts. Last season, Tampa Bay beat Philadelphia, again, gave Jalen Hurts fits. So I don't think that Philadelphia wants to open themselves up to lots of blitzes, or at least, right, that's the perception, that's the bias. But they may need to take that risk, right, to win. If they can't run the ball against Tampa Bay, if Tampa Bay is doing a good job of shutting down the run, Philadelphia may need to open it up again this week. And it just may be that they are a pass-heavy team in back-to-back weeks. It's not quite as juicy as it was last week when they were playing a defense that played more man. But I imagine that Jalen Hurts and Philadelphia has put together a plan over time to sort of counteract the defense that Tampa Bay plays. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's very within the realm of possibility that Philadelphia will, again, be passing the ball this week. And with their skilled wide receivers, they need to be in consideration. All right, OWS family, thank you for listening to this episode of Bias Check. Look forward to playing this week. Look forward to seeing you all at the top of the leaderboards. Keep on grinding, and let's bring home a couple championships this week.